I never thought I'd be the person who said no to family. Growing up, Rachel and I weren't just sisters. We were supposed to be best friends, the kind who shared clothes and secrets and dreams about who we'd become. She was 3 years older, which meant she got to do everything first. First day of high school. First boyfriend. First apartment. First wedding. I was always a few steps behind, watching her move through life, like she had some kind of map I'd never been given. People loved Rachel. She had this way of walking into a room and making everyone lean in, like whatever she was about to say would be the most important thing they'd heard all week. I was quieter. I worked as a graphic designer from home, kept a small circle of friends, and honestly preferred it that way. Rachel said I needed to get out more, meet people, stop hiding. But I wasn't hiding. I was just living differently. When Rachel married Conrad, I was genuinely happy for her. He seemed kind, thoughtful in a way that balanced out her energy. They had Ivy a year later, and Rachel's life looked perfect from the outside. Big house in a nice neighborhood. Successful husband who worked in finance. A daughter who was sweet and shy and had Rachel's dark hair. Then 2 years ago, everything changed. Conrad had an accident. He was driving home late from work when another car ran a red light and hit him on the driver's side. Rachel called me from the hospital, her voice shaking in a way I'd never heard before. She told me Conrad had survived, but that the doctors weren't sure if he'd ever walk again. The next few months were brutal for her. She had to learn how to take care of him, manage his medical appointments, handle insurance paperwork. Ivy was only 7 then, and Rachel said she'd started having nightmares, waking up crying for her dad. I helped where I could. I brought groceries, picked Ivy up from school when Rachel couldn't, sent money when medical bills piled up. Rachel talked about how hard it was, how exhausted she felt, how she didn't know if she was strong enough to keep going. People rallied around her. Friends organized fundraisers. Her church set up meal trains. Everyone wanted to support the woman who was holding her family together through tragedy. I admired her for it. I told her she was braver than I could ever be. So when she called me 3 weeks ago and asked if I could stay at her house for 10 days while she took a trip, I didn't hesitate. She needed a break, she said. She'd been invited to a wellness retreat in California by one of her close friends, all expenses paid. It was a chance to rest, to recharge, to remember who she was outside of being a caretaker. I told her, of course. I'd take time off work, stay at the house, help Conrad with whatever he needed, keep an eye on Ivy. Rachel's voice softened when I said yes. She told me I was saving her life. She told me she didn't know what she'd do without me. I felt needed. Useful. Like I was finally doing something that mattered. Looking back now, I realize I should have asked more questions. I arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Rachel was already packing, her suitcase open on the bed, clothes folded in neat stacks. She moved through the house like she was checking off a list in her head, pointing out where things were, reminding me about Ivy's bedtime routine, telling me which nights Conrad had physical therapy appointments. Conrad was in the living room when I walked in. He was sitting in his wheelchair near the window, staring out at the yard. He didn't turn around when I said hello. Rachel waved it off. He's having a rough day, she said. He gets like this sometimes. Ivy was upstairs in her room. I knocked softly before stepping inside. She was sitting on her bed with a coloring book, her legs tucked underneath her. She looked up at me but didn't say anything. I smiled. Hey, Ivy. I brought you something. I handed her a small bag of markers I'd picked up on the way over. She took it carefully, her fingers brushing mine for just a second, and nodded. Rachel had mentioned that Ivy didn't talk much anymore. It started after the accident, she said. Ivy had been in the car with Conrad that night. She wasn't hurt physically, but something inside her had shut down. She stopped speaking at school. Stopped speaking at home. The doctors said it was selective mutism, a trauma response. They said she'd talk again when she felt safe. I sat down on the edge of Ivy's bed and asked if she liked to draw. She nodded. I asked what her favorite color was. She pointed to the purple marker in the pack. I told her I'd be staying for a little while, that her mom needed some time away to rest, and that I'd be here if she needed anything. She looked at me for a long moment, her dark eyes serious and steady, and then went back to coloring. Rachel left the next morning. She hugged me tight at the door, told me again how grateful she was, and promised to check in. Then she was gone, her car disappearing down the street as I stood on the porch waving. The house felt different after she left. Quieter, but not in a peaceful way. In a way that made you notice every sound. The hum of the refrigerator. The ticking of the clock in the hallway. The faint creak of Conrad's wheelchair when he shifted his weight. That first day, I tried to settle in. I made lunch for Conrad and brought it to him on a tray. He thanked me quietly, barely looking up. I asked if he needed anything else. He shook his head. Ivy stayed in her room most of the afternoon. I checked on her a few times, but she seemed content with her coloring books and toys. I didn't want to hover. By evening, I'd started to relax a little. This wouldn't be so bad. 10 days of helping out, making sure everyone was okay, giving Rachel the break she needed. But that night, something happened that made me start to wonder. I was in the guest room, lying in bed with my laptop, catching up on some work emails. It was almost 11. The house was dark except for the light from my screen. Then I heard it. A soft knock on my door. I sat up, confused. Conrad? The door opened slowly, and Ivy stepped inside. She was wearing her pajamas, her hair messy from lying down. She walked over to my bed and stood there, her hands folded in front of her. I set my laptop aside. Ivy, what's wrong? Can't sleep? She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out and touched my arm, her fingers light and careful. Then she leaned in close, so close I could feel her breath against my ear. And she whispered, "Aunt Mitchell, Daddy is leaving with her again." I froze. Ivy pulled back and looked at me, her eyes wide and frightened. Then she turned and left the room, her footsteps quiet in the hallway. For a moment, I just sat there, trying to process what I'd heard. Ivy had spoken. Actually spoken. Her voice was small and thin, but it was real. And what she'd said didn't make any sense. Daddy is leaving with her again. I got out of bed and went to the window. My room faced the backyard, and from there I could see part of the side lawn and the driveway. That's when I saw him. Conrad was standing. Not sitting. Not in his wheelchair. Standing on the grass in his bare feet, wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants, his arms crossed over his chest. He was talking to someone I couldn't see clearly. A woman, I thought, based on the shape and the long hair. They were too far away for me to hear what they were saying, but Conrad looked tense. His shoulders were tight. His head was tilted down slightly, like he was listening to something he didn't want to hear. I felt my heart start to race. My sister had told me Conrad couldn't walk. She'd told everyone. The accident had damaged his spine. The doctors had said recovery was unlikely. Rachel had spent 2 years taking care of him, adjusting their entire lives around his disability. But he was standing. I pressed my hand against the glass, my breath fogging the window. Then Conrad turned, and for a split second, I thought he looked directly at me. The woman he'd been talking to stepped back into the shadows, and Conrad actually walked, across the lawn and disappeared around the side of the house. I backed away from the window, my hands shaking. This didn't make sense. None of this made sense. I thought about going downstairs, confronting him, demanding an explanation. But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was confusion. Maybe it was the look in Ivy's eyes when she'd whispered to me. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. The next morning, Conrad was in his wheelchair at the kitchen table when I came downstairs. He was drinking coffee, his hands wrapped around the mug, his expression blank. I made myself toast and sat across from him, trying to keep my voice casual. "How'd you sleep?" "Fine," he said. I waited, hoping he'd say something else. He didn't. Ivy came downstairs a few minutes later. She glanced at her dad, then at me, and sat down with her cereal without making a sound. I wanted to ask her about last night. I wanted to ask Conrad. But I didn't know how to start that conversation without sounding insane. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention. I noticed that Conrad's grip was strong when he moved his wheelchair. Too strong for someone who supposedly had limited upper body function. I noticed that the wheelchair sometimes ended up in different parts of the house overnight, even though Conrad claimed he didn't move much after going to bed. I noticed that Ivy watched her father constantly, her eyes tracking his movements like she was waiting for something. And I noticed the phone calls. Rachel called every other day, always at the same time, always when Conrad was nearby. She'd ask how things were going, if I needed anything, if Conrad was behaving himself. That last part always felt strange, like a joke that wasn't really a joke. One afternoon, while Conrad was napping and Ivy was outside playing, I found a notebook in the living room. It was small, spiral-bound, tucked between the couch cushions. I opened it. Inside were pages and pages of Ivy's handwriting. Short sentences, some of them crossed out, some of them repeated. Daddy said not to tell. Mommy said he has to stay in the chair. I don't like when they fight. I'm scared. My chest tightened as I read. I flipped through more pages, my hands trembling. One entry was dated a week ago, right before Rachel left. Mommy told Daddy if he stands up while she's gone, she'll take me away. I closed the notebook and put it back exactly where I'd found it. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept replaying Ivy's whisper in my head. I kept seeing Conrad standing on the lawn. I kept hearing Rachel's voice on the phone, sweet and tired and grateful. I decided to stay awake. I left my bedroom door cracked and sat in the chair by the window, wrapped in a blanket, waiting. Just after midnight, I heard it. Footsteps. Not the sound of wheels on hardwood. Footsteps. I stood up slowly and moved to the doorway. From there, I could see down the hall. Conrad's bedroom door was open. The wheelchair was still inside, parked by the bed. But Conrad wasn't in it. He was walking down the hallway, his hand trailing along the wall for balance. He moved carefully, quietly, like someone who didn't want to be heard. I followed him. He went downstairs, through the kitchen, and out the back door. I stayed inside, watching through the window as he crossed the yard and stopped near the fence. A moment later, the same woman from before appeared. I still couldn't see her face clearly, but I could tell they were arguing. Conrad's hands were moving, gesturing sharply. The woman stepped closer, and he stepped back. Then she handed him something. An envelope, maybe. Conrad took it, looked at it, and shoved it into his pocket. The woman left. Conrad stood there for a long time, his head bowed, before finally turning and walking back toward the house. I hurried back upstairs before he could see me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The next morning, I made a decision. I waited until Conrad was alone in the living room, and I walked in and closed the door behind me. He looked up at me surprised. "I need to talk to you," I said. He didn't respond. I sat down across from him and folded my hands in my lap. "I saw you last night. Standing. Walking." His face went pale. "I saw you the other night too. And I found Ivy's notebook." Conrad's jaw tightened. He looked away, his hands gripping the arms of the wheelchair. "I'm not here to judge you," I said quietly. "But I need to know what's going on. Because none of this makes sense." For a long time, he didn't say anything. Then, finally, he spoke. "She made me do it." His voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear him. "What?" "Rachel," he said. "She made me pretend." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Conrad took a shaky breath and continued. The accident was real. I was hurt, but I wasn't paralyzed. The doctors said I'd recover with physical therapy. It would take time, but I'd walk again. Then why? Because Rachel needed me not to, he said. His voice cracked. She needed the sympathy, the support, the money people donated, the attention. I stared at him. She told me if I walked, if I told anyone the truth, she'd leave and take Ivy. She said no one would believe me. She said I'd lose everything. His hands were shaking now. I stayed in the chair because I didn't know what else to do. I stayed because I was scared. And Ivy, she saw everything. She heard the fights. Rachel told her not to talk about it, told her it was a secret, told her daddy would go away if she said anything. That's why she stopped talking, I said slowly. Conrad nodded, his eyes wet. I felt sick. Who's the woman you've been meeting? He looked up at me startled. I saw you, I said. Twice now. Conrad exhaled. That's my sister. She's the only person I told. She's been trying to help me figure out what to do. She wanted me to leave, to take Ivy and go. But Rachel has lawyers. She has people who believe her story. I'd never win. I sat back in my chair, trying to process everything. My sister. The person I'd admired for years. The person everyone admired. She'd been lying the entire time. I looked at Conrad, at this man who'd been trapped in his own home, afraid to stand, afraid to speak, afraid to be himself. And I made a decision. I'm not going to let her do this to you anymore, I said. Conrad shook his head. You can't, he said. She'll destroy you. She destroys everyone who gets in her way. Then let her try, I said. Over the next few days, I started gathering evidence. I recorded Conrad walking on my phone. I took pictures of Ivy's notebook. I asked Conrad to tell me everything, and I wrote it all down. Ivy started talking to me more. Quietly, hesitantly, but she talked. She told me about the nights Rachel yelled at Conrad. She told me about being told to keep secrets. She told me she missed her dad, the real version of him, the one who used to pick her up and spin her around. I told her she was brave. I told her she didn't have to keep secrets anymore. Rachel called 2 days before she was supposed to come home. She sounded cheerful, refreshed. She asked how everything was going. I told her everything was fine. When Rachel walked through the door on Sunday afternoon, tanned and smiling, I was waiting for her in the living room. Conrad was there too, in his wheelchair. Rachel hugged me, thanked me again, asked if there were any problems. I smiled. No problems. She looked at Conrad. You doing okay, honey? He nodded. That night, after Ivy was in bed, I asked Rachel if we could talk. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat down at the kitchen table. Sure, what's up? I pulled out my phone and set it on the table. I need you to explain something to me, I said. Her smile faltered. Explain what? I played the video. It showed Conrad standing in the backyard, walking along the fence line, stretching his legs. Rachel's face went white. What is this? It's the truth, I said calmly. She stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. You had no right, she hissed. I had every right, I said. You lied to everyone. You forced Conrad to pretend. You scared Ivy into silence. Rachel's eyes narrowed. He told you that? He's lying. He's been lying to you. I pulled out Ivy's notebook and set it on the table. Rachel stared at it. Your daughter wrote all of this, I said. She's been terrified. And you knew. Rachel's hands were shaking now. You don't understand, she said. You have no idea what it's like. The pressure. The expectations. I needed people to see me as strong, as someone worth supporting. So you used your husband? She didn't answer. I leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell the truth. You're going to apologize to Conrad and to Ivy. And you're going to figure out how to be an actual partner instead of a prison warden. And if I don't? Then I'll make sure everyone knows, I said. Every single person who donated money, who brought you meals, who called you a hero. They'll all know. Rachel stared at me, her jaw tight. Then she laughed. A cold, bitter sound. You think you're so noble, she said. You think you're saving them. But you're just jealous. You've always been jealous of me. I stood up. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it because it's right. Rachel didn't say anything else. She grabbed her wine glass and walked upstairs. The next morning, Conrad stood up in front of her. He didn't say anything dramatic. He just got up from the wheelchair, walked across the room, and looked her in the eye. Ivy was there too. She watched her father stand, and then she spoke. I'm not scared anymore, she said. Rachel left the house that afternoon. She didn't say goodbye. Conrad and I contacted a lawyer. We submitted the evidence. We made sure Ivy's voice was heard, gently and carefully. The legal process took months, but Conrad was granted primary custody. Rachel was allowed supervised visits, and she was required to attend therapy. Some people believed her side of the story at first. But slowly, as the truth came out, the support faded. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. But I also felt something else. Relief. Clarity. Like I'd finally stopped waiting for permission to do the right thing. Conrad and Ivy moved into a smaller house across town. He started physical therapy again, working to rebuild the strength he'd lost. Ivy started talking more. She joined an art class. She smiled. I visited them often. We had dinner together, played board games, talked about normal things. One evening, as I was getting ready to leave, Ivy ran up and hugged me. Thank you, Aunt Mitchell, she whispered. I hugged her back, my throat tight. Conrad walked me to the door. We stood there for a moment, and he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite name. You saved us, he said quietly. I shook my head. You saved yourselves. I just stopped looking the other way. I drove home that night thinking about everything that had happened. About Rachel and how people can twist love into control. About Conrad and how silence can become a prison. About Ivy and how children carry the weight of things they should never have to carry. I thought about myself too. About how I'd spent so many years trying to be the good sister, the helpful one, the one who never made waves. I realized I didn't want to be that person anymore. I wanted to be the person who asked questions, who trusted my instincts, who stood up even when it was hard. I still think about Rachel sometimes. I wonder if she understands what she did, if she regrets it, if she's changed. But mostly, I think about Ivy. I think about the way she looks at her father now, without fear. I think about the way she laughs, open and free. And I think about the fact that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth, even when everyone around you has agreed to believe a lie. Family isn't supposed to be perfect. It's supposed to be honest. It's supposed to be safe. And if it's not, you have every right to walk away. Or in my case, to stay and fight. If you've ever felt trapped by someone else's version of the truth, I hope you know that your voice matters. Your story matters. And you don't have to carry someone else's secrets just because they're family. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones we need to hold accountable. Thanks for listening to mine. Take care of yourself and remember that choosing your own peace isn't selfish. It's necessary.